Welcome, everybody, to today's 3 in 30 seminar, presented by three Beaton partners, John Clay in Sydney, Libby Maynard, and myself, George Beaton, in Melbourne. This is the sixth and final episode in our first season of 3 in 30, and we're particularly excited to bring you this new format today. The topic is the dangers of discounting and what to do instead. The way we're going to run this is that between us, we're going to present three scenarios and discuss them, introducing relevant evidence from our survey research to inform the points we are making. At all times, you are invited to ask your questions, and in the question box on the right-hand side of your screens, these will be forwarded to me to pick the moment to flick a question to either Libby or John or myself. We will endeavour to answer them as we go. We may not be able to cover them all depending on the volume of what you put up to us, but we do encourage active participation in this webinar. Now let's jump right in. The first scenario relates to a prospective client who's come to you and says, I'd like to switch to you and your firm, but my existing provider charges me less and usually gives me a 10% discount. Are you prepared to match their rates and their discounts? Now, this is classic price down pressure from a prospective client in this case, or an existing client, it could be as well, who's introducing a new work type or a new project to you. And the question is, are you going to roll over and say yes, or are you going to seek alternative ways to mitigate the price down pressure and offer the client alternatives? In the next chart, we show why clients switch. This chart is from our law firm research over many years and shows the reasons that clients of law firms give for switching from one their main firm, to another. And the time period is over the last 2 years. The chart shows three kinds of reasons. Those reasons which are controllable to switch to you, that you can influence. Those reasons which are controllable to switch away from you. And those reasons are not attributable to the firm, like the individual has moved organizations. So when we look at this, one of the striking things is that cerise bar in the middle. The current firm offered less expensive fees, a lower price. Only 8% of these responses focus on the point in the scenario. So this begs the question and opens up the discussion, why discount if so few firms are actually looking for a discount when they report independently and anonymously in research like this? So let's open this up. Libby, what would you say in response to this scenario?
I think one of the first things I'd ask, George, is, why have they actually come to us? Just to bring that to into the context. But then, having had that conversation, I think we also need to remember that not all clients are equal. We need to have arrangements that are fair to us, fair to our other clients, and fair to the incoming client. And if they're new, we might want to offer something that either encourages a trial, it might be a small piece of work that we can ring fence, or alternatively, reward volume and loyalty and perhaps suggest some kind of volume discount arrangement, something of that nature.
So, Libby, when you say not all clients are equal, could you elaborate on that point? Equal in whose eyes?
Sure. In the firm, or in the firm's eyes, some clients are very large clients who generate year on year annuity revenue, profitable work, very loyal. Some clients have a very transactional view. They shop around, they price hunt, and I think at the outset you need to make an assessment of what kind of client this is likely to be, and how you actually want to encourage that and reward that relationship into the future.
John, would you say you'd go as far as, in responding to Libby, that some clients you might choose to walk away from and say, you're not the right client for us. You might be the right client for another firm, but not for us. How do you make that call?
No, that's a very good point, George, in terms of really understanding your customer base so that you can really precisely match your offering for those customers. I mean, the charts show the legal profession, but just as equally in the engineering built environment organizations, that same switching aspects occur. People don't change for a few percentage points. I mean, the attractiveness of the new organization or the existing firm not having attractive fees. Now, there are other factors, the expertise, the advice, the aspects around service, responsibility. They're the sort of factors that generally will shift things in terms of the need to move. But being close to your customers and understanding your customers, what's the right price points for your customers, and actually we're saying to walk away for those organizations which you're not going to be in the right ballpark, and don't be afraid to do that, because there'll be other organizations where you have a better fit.
Thanks, John. So not all clients are equal, and the provider has sovereignty too. We talk about customer sovereignty, but there's also provider sovereignty. In other words, being able to make a call in your own interests. It's not just the customer's always right, or the prospective customer, the prospective client. There's the sovereignty of the firm and its position, its reputation, the satisfaction of their staff. John has mentioned that the switching factors that are shown in the chart are from the legal profession. They're pretty identical, are they not, John, in the built and natural environment professions? And I can say they're pretty identical in the accounting and management consulting professions. So this is a universal set of findings. It varies a little from profession to profession, but essentially the role of price in the switching decision remains pretty small in the scheme of the many reasons that clients switch or seek to switch. I'm reminded in the auditing aspects of the accounting profession, some audits are global for multinational companies, and the same firm audits all over the world for probity and governance reasons. And very often the price is dictated by where the parent is headquartered, in Chicago or London, where it is. The price is dictated, and the local Australian or New Zealand firm just got to suck it up, because that's the price that's given and centrally negotiated. Inside those firms, you talk to the staff and the partners who are involved in doing this audit at massively discounted rates in their minds to what they would normally be charging, and the opportunity cost of that, and they really don't like it. So there are staff and professional satisfaction reasons also for getting fairly paid from the firm's perspective, not just from the client's perspective. Do you have any last thoughts on this, Libby, before we maybe move on to scenario 2?
I think the only other comment I would end with is going back to the point about being fair to our other clients. And, clients do sometimes talk to each other. You do have a reputation in the market to protect. And, it's about, as I say, again, rewarding loyalty and length of relationship and having a sense of reciprocation, I think.
And we should also remember that key decision makers in clients move from one organization to another. I well remember hearing from a client who had moved to another major organization and had at his prior organization a real sweetheart deal, sort of mates rates fee structure. And when he got to his new organization, he realized it didn't apply. And that caused him in the end to switch. So we should remember that discounts travel.
They do.
They travel, and they are, in the title of this seminar, dangerous, unless they are really well motivated and the client understands why. As John said, it's a knowledge matter that I can do at a time when we have capacity to offer you a discount. So, well made points. Thank you. Libby, would you like to take scenario 2?
Yes, so scenario 2, quite a common occurrence. You've provided a client with an estimate, fixed or capped fee for a major project, and the client says it was more than they expected and asks you to reduce it. So another example of direct pressure by a client to reduce fees. And I think we have to remember here that it's actually the role of the client to, negotiate a good deal, and we shouldn't forget that it is in fact a negotiation. What we have found though is that when you're in that negotiation and you make inquiries about what are the pricing priorities, you'll find that the lowest price is usually often only about 2% of respondents would say the lowest price is what's driving their purchase decision, and in fact elements like cost consciousness, at least half respondents would say that cost consciousness was more important. Now you might ask what cost consciousness is, so we might go to the next slide. And these are the sorts of things that you would expect clients to be interested in. You'll see their appropriate scoping, good value, pricing by complexity. So making sure that you actually pitch it depending upon what the client values and not profiteering, efficiency, transparency, proactive communication. And that certainly rings true in the legal sector. I think the most important item that's highlighted here is appropriate scoping. I think, John, you've experienced, similar perceptions and views in the built environment, natural built environment.
Yes, Libby, that's spot on. I mean, this whole aspect of a project fee or a fixed price fee, it's so important to get the right scope in place and the right scoping sorted out. And if there are variations with that project, seeing how you can actually manage those, how you actually look at spending money responsibly for that organization. Yes, it may be a request to actually reduce the price for a particular scope, but if you just reduce the price, we just bring the whole lot down. So you need to make sure you've got the right scoping in place, and that includes the initial kickoff meetings as well with an organization and being clear as to how things are undertaken. If that scope does change, if the cost structures do change, how do you actually shift your delivery? Now, instead of having so many geotechnical investigations, how can you reduce the number of geotechnical investigations for a particular site? Instead of having lots of reporting, how do you reduce the reporting? So different ways in which you can actually change that approach to make sure you come in under the right price. But it is the same in a major project delivery.
John, your professional background is full of contract variations and project variations and the unexpected that's come. It's true in other professions. There are always unforeseen things that will happen that you can't scope at the start. But what's your experience of, and what does our research suggest about managing variations in the way you agree to a price?
Well, that's a good point, George. Within your project fees, you'd be building in some sort of contingencies anyhow. So you need to make sure you build in some contingencies within that. And then there will be certain things that come up out of scope. But it also comes back to the right communications, the right relationship, the right engagement that you have with those organizations to map out what's fair. I mean, if you've got a good relationship on a project, the right culture in place for the project, you can negotiate the right uplift in fees if it is legitimate. But you'll generally be building in some contingencies into the fees as well. But that only goes to a certain level. So you need to get that right balance.
Yeah, yeah. Could I share some information on work we've done on the relative contributions to the client's perceptions of value? So in the client's mind, am I getting value or not? Or am I expecting to get value or not? When we dissected the contributions of the fee level, the price, and the level of perceived cost consciousness that the prospective client has of the provider, when we look at those two, in almost every situation that we've analyzed, cost consciousness plays more of a role in the perception of value than price. And when you look at that, it translates to, I'm prepared to pay a high price for what you are promising in your benefits. And I will pay it willingly if the cost consciousness I perceive is high. And if I am looking at a price and the cost consciousness is lower than I might have expected, then value disappears, value evaporates. I feel I'm not being provided with the value I would have expected. So when you look at the balance between those two independent drivers of value for the same level of benefit derived, the same quality and the same promised outcomes, cost consciousness is actually more important. And that comes down to communication. How well do you provide the client with options? We could do it in method A at this price. We could do it in method B at this price, or method C at a higher price. Now, let's have a discussion about the pros and cons of each of those and what will constitute an acceptable risk profile to your client, elapsed time, cycle time for the project client, and outcomes. And in that way, you empower the client to choose one of your options. We call that a choice of yeses, as opposed to yes or no, we're not going with you. So cost consciousness is a really important driver in clients' minds, as this research shows on the chart that we've been looking at, in providing estimates, providing updates, John's point, and providing options, so you manage clients' expectations through the whole cycle of the project, before it commences, while it's in progress, and once it's completed, so that you complete the loop for the client. Libby, any last points from you?
Yes, I think, George, there was a great example when I was at Clayton Utes, where we actually created a frame of reference for the client that established that the proposal that we were putting forward was not unreasonable. We were one of 4 firms asked to bid in connection with an IPO. We presented, data from the last 10 IPOs we'd done that showed that the budgets were within a certain range, indicated where the risky bits might be, where the lumpy bits were. And as a result of that, I think it demonstrated 2 things. Firstly, that we were very capable of doing the work. Nearest to the pin is a good expression to demonstrate to the client that we had done this particular job for a similar sort of client before. And in addition to that, we were well versed with what would be involved in the scope of work. We were the outside firm, the most expensive firm, and ended up being successful.
Great story. We've got a lovely question here from Rob McKenzie at Mackenzie Moncrief. Rob asks, what are the elements that constitute good value in the mind of the client? Who would like to answer that? Libby, John? From our research?
I'd say, I was going to say from a legal perspective, I think feeding on what you've just said, George, it's very much about the cost consciousness elements, but I think it varies from client to client. It's actually a matter of asking the client at the outset what's important, and are they risk averse, or are they price sensitive? price insensitive, you'll get a sense of the things that are important to them, and that will vary.
Yeah. And time for one more brief question from Paul Bonamy. John, you might like to field this from Paul Bonamy. Is it worth considering how to help partners in a professional services firm understand that it's sometimes better not to win the deal because of price expectations? How do you manage internally, culturally? No, we're not going to take this deal. We're not going to discount. And if we lose it, we lose it. A few words, John, on how you would see that being handled.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, George. I mean, it comes back to that value equation, value, benefits minus costs, and looking at how you can actually work with your internal stakeholders to demonstrate that by taking this type of work is going to be detrimental. If that price is so low that it brings down everything else across your business, well, you need to have a good, mature conversation and be able to look at that wider remits with the organisation in terms of how that's undertaken. I think we've got one last scenario, if you'd like me to touch upon that.
Yes. Let's move on to scenario 3, John.
Just to wrap up, our final scenario is you are competing for a large project or a spot on a major panel to provide services for the next 3 years. And you know that some of your competitors are going to bid low. What should your approach be? And this is quite often faced, when working on major infrastructure, major projects, no doubtly on major audits or major legal panels, very similar thing. And Libby briefly touched upon this about being closest to the pin, being right on the money in terms of what your offering is. And I think, Shannon, if we can put the next slide up, and if we can look at, say, organizations don't necessarily select on price, and especially in the built environment, where you need to make sure if it's designing a bridge or a building or a road, complex infrastructure, it's those key areas of expertise, that reliability, leading expertise need quality documentation, aspects around the delivery aspects, as opposed to price. Price is probably the second from the bottom in terms of factors. And I'll be quite interested to see, I know that's very much the case in the engineering sector. Yes, you've got to be competitive on price, but price is not going to be the ultimate determinant. In fact, 66%, 2/3 of organizations we're looking at don't select on price. And I know in the previous organizations that I've worked in, we've on numerous occasions were middle to top of the range in terms of not always the lowest, not quite often not the lowest in terms of pricing, and that business has been won because of the overall delivery that the company and the pedigree the company has. I was just wondering if that's the same for Libby in legal and George across your breadth of experience in accounting or legal or engineering.
Certainly, John, in legal, that's it's the same. Again, there's a fairly high percentage, and George will be able to share that with us in a moment. In legal, it's I think still pretty close to, north of 60%.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think and certainly expertise is one of the most important factors. I think though that one of the things I've found is managing the internal stakeholders. Just going back to the comments that you made, John, when you've got a panel arrangement, there tends to be a bit of, or a major panel refresh, there tends to be a bit of hysteria internally. And so managing that is actually often more challenging than managing the client's expectations. I think also one of the most important things is also understanding what that procurement process involves. Is there going to be a best and final offer? Do you need to leave a bit of wriggle room for that? Are you dealing, who are you dealing with here? Is it procurement? Do they have particular boxes that they need to pick? And what's the whole value bundle that you're delivering here? Are there some value adds that take away the focus just on price?
Thank you, Libby. Yes, for the record, it's about 50% in accounting and we should be clear what these numbers of 66 and 62 and 50 in accounting refer to. These are clients who have selected a firm that was more expensive than the other options on an occasion. So what is their buying pattern? It's not that they have never or have always. What do they say about it? Yes, I have. And why do I do it? Well, I do it because of expertise and service levels that I know I will get or I anticipate I will get. We should also recognize on this that these are averages in the chart we've been looking at. And for routinized, commoditized work, price does play a bigger role. You would expect that. And for complex, but the company kind of work, price plays an absolutely negligible role. Reference the story Libby told about, being the most expensive and coming out the winner in a very big piece of corporate advice. So let's move on to the last chart, please, Shannon, to wrap this up. We promised that these 3 and 30s would give 3 key takeaways from our perspective in the 30 minutes we've spent together. So takeaway 1 is, do not assume you're competing on price. This should be your fallback position after probing. You know what we say about assumptions in life. The mother of all, or parent of all, I should say, stuff-ups. Do not assume until you are crystal clear that you're not competing on price. Test the option, probe. Takeaway number 2, when challenged about price, focus on reducing the total cost to both the firm and the provider yourselves, and being cost conscious, providing estimates, providing options, rather than simply discounting. The easiest thing in the world to discount. It's a slippery slope. And once you're on the slope, you're on a race to the bottom. So focus on total cost and the reduction of total cost, which then gives more price setting discretion. And thirdly, be proactive and creative. It takes time to do this in thinking about the options. John's example of how might we do this bridge? Probably 5 or 6 ways you could design the bridge. Well, let's put up 3 to the client. So be proactive, take the initiative, put in a non-complying bid if you think it's a better way of doing it, as well as a complying bid. Have regard to what the client values and, emphasis and, what's fair to you, your firm. If value is going to be created and shared, the sharing of the value has to be fair. Otherwise, somebody is going to not want to come back next time, and it's either going to be the client or the firm. So it's in everybody's interest in a services industry to do this. Well, thank you, everybody. We're drawing to the close of this, our 6th episode and our first season of 3 and 30. On behalf of all at Beaton, I want to thank the audiences who have attended and encouraged us and asked questions and made contributions and given us feedback. You have inspired us to resolve to continue the 3 and 30 format. As we say, come and munch your lunch in 30 minutes and take away 3 ideas. That assumes you're on the east coast of Australia. It might be having an afternoon tea or a morning tea for people in either direction from where the 3 of us are today. We will be back next half year, in the second half of this calendar year. There will be plenty of notice of the episodes, and they will be inspired by your participation and contributions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.